Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coach Craig Sports. We have another team preview for the 2021 redraft season. This time it's going to be the 2021 Steelers preview. Obviously, you can see that I am not by myself this time. Talking about 32 teams alone gets a little dry after a while. So I figure bring in some people who know what they're talking about, especially people that are in tune with their teams. So without further ado, I'll let my guest introduce himself.
No, thanks for having me, Craig. I'm Ty McLaughlin from TNFF Pod, and I appreciate you having me on. And I know, in the fantasy industry, it's always a fine line you have to walk between objectivity and solid analysis and unbiased opinions. And I think, even though I am a fan of the Steelers, I think I enjoy talking to people who are fans of the team too. So I definitely appreciate you having me on, and I like talking to fans, objectivity or not.
Yeah, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to do a rundown. If you guys have seen my other episodes, pretty similar. Just going to go through all the positions, talk about the ECR, the expert consensus ranking from Fantasy Pros, as well as the half-point PPR ADP for each player. So we'll start off with the quarterback position. Big Ben comes in at ECR, quarterback 20, and ADP quarterback 19. He's actually tied with Justin Fields there right now. And like I said there, he's going around quarterbacks like Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, and Tua Tagovailoa. So what are your thoughts on kind of Big Ben? Just real quick, short thoughts this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably in a void when it comes to fantasy football. Like, he's my quarterback 23, but he's also one of those types of quarterbacks that I'm not necessarily targeting in my fantasy drafts. I think of the Derek Carrs or even like the Phillip Rivers of past days. They don't bring a lot of upside to your roster, right? The only high variance these guys can experience usually is a career arc cool down, if you will. Like, it seems like their outlier range of outcomes is for them to kind of fall off a cliff when it comes to them aging out. And I think as much as we like some of the weapons in this passing game, I think we have to seriously consider how much emphasis has been placed on trying to establish the run in Pittsburgh this offseason and just some of the natural regression that Ben Roethlisberger is in line to experience himself.
Yeah, I got him at quarterback 22, so we're about same page there. Are you buying into like some of the questions about his arm? I think they're a little bit overrated, like his arm strength. I don't think it's as bad as people want to try to portray it is, but the depth of target was really hindered last year because he had to get the ball out so quick too as well.
Yeah, and I don't think you can put, you can't overemphasize that point of how fast the ball was getting out. Like, the release time is just historic. And that's, kind of what happened. Like, Pittsburgh couldn't run the ball last year and Ben couldn't throw deep. Like, I think that is definitely a concern. And we've seen the advanced metrics. You can go on PFF and look at passes thrown 20 plus yards downfield. And you can see that it's definitely tailed off. It's not the big Ben Roethlisberger of old. But we also, there's a really big rabbit hole we could go down with play action where Big Ben has just really been allergic to play action in his career. It's mind blowing. And then you have Matt Canada coming in to call plays in this offense for the first time. And that's in addition to the emphasis placed on the run game and, drafting Nadia Harris in the first round. So what we hope is that the efficiency can kind of compensate for what's going to be a big dip in volume in Pittsburgh and what's going to probably be a pretty similar offense, as frustrating as it is, when we think about that low average depth of target and, some extension of the run game when it comes to that passing game. But what we hope is some play action is injected into this offense and some of the deep shots are just more efficient going forward in this new look offense in Pittsburgh. And that would, because everything is going to trickle down for Big Ben. We do like the weapons and it's kind of all on Big Ben's shoulders now.
Yeah, I think the guys he's going around, there's just more upside with everybody else that's around him too as well.
Now that we're out of like best ball formats, it just seems like he's kind of off the boards when it comes to redraft. Like, maybe you're looking at streaming mid-season in your redraft league, but outside of being really quarterback needy in a bye week, I just don't see that.
Yeah, we could probably do a whole episode just about his home road splits and everything like that too. So this is more redraft focused, but we're going to poke in a little bit of Dynasty here. Do you have any interest in Mason Rudolph or Dwayne Haskins in Dynasty as a flyer or a stash at all?
Nah, I mean, I wouldn't actually be surprised. Like you mentioned, it might be the death of Ben Roethlisberger has kind of always been greatly exaggerated, and I'd prefer to see the Steelers go with a bridge quarterback if Big Ben was to retire after this year. But I wouldn't even be surprised if Big Ben tried to run it back in 2022. He just
Yeah.
strikes me as the guy who might have to be like really have to fall off a cliff or get dragged off the field before he does retire. But if he does hang it up, I'd just rather them go with like a Taysom Hill or like a Teddy Bridgewater or Fitzpatrick or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I do have a lot of faith in Tomlin as a game plan, and hopefully this Matt Canada offense works out a little bit. But I'm pretty optimistic they could bring in a quarterback who kind of allows them to keep this style of play kind of afloat that we need to become accustomed to, in Pittsburgh, because it is very game plan oriented. Like the scheme is pretty heavily game plan from week to week and depending on the opponent. And there's just a lot of room for success to be built in, I think. And that's, what we might have to really transition to is a run heavy offense looking forward with Big Ben. We're asking all the questions about the quarterback play, even going forward into 2022. There's no quick fix on the horizon. In my opinion, it's not on the roster. And, I'm so not a Mason Rudolph fan. I'm a bigger like Josh Dobbs fan, and Dwayne Haskins might arguably look the best through a couple preseason games if we're including the Hall of Fame game. And then you just look at some of the tea leaves from the team with them adding the running back and even some of the offensive line that they've and Matt Canada coming in. So I just think we could see an even more low average depth of target offense when you include like jet sweeps and screen passes and stuff like that. So I'm not sure that quarterback going forward is going to be a huge fantasy asset to try and even identify anyways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm not really buying into either two of them. I think Haskins himself has too many problems. I think they masked a lot of his problems that he actually did have at Ohio State. Like, people don't understand how good he had it there and like how many screen passes and stuff they threw, like Terry McLaurin and Paris Campbell and all this. It was so easy for him. The Steelers aren't going to be bad enough where they're going to be picking high enough to get, a good quarterback prospect in the draft next year. So unless they're trading up to get something, it's probably not going to happen too. So like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if Big Ben comes back though. Like, unless, like something really happens to his knee or something like that, unless he gets really hurt again. But we'll move over to running back though. Obviously the big rookie name is Nadia Harris, and expert consensus ranking has him at running back 13. ADP is running back 10. So he's going around the likes of Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon, Antonio Gibson, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire at this point in time. Where do you kind of stand on Harris? Where do you stand in terms of him compared to like those four other running backs as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there in lockstep with the market, basically. I think I would have him in a tier with Antonio Gibson. I know a lot of the early preseason usage is kind of scary when it comes to J.D. McKissick, but I still love Antonio Gibson. I definitely have Najee ahead of guys like Joe Mixon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and DeAndre Swift. I think he kind of has that confluence of events in his range of outcomes more so than those other guys. And, we say volume is king, and I think he is in line to see the most volume. And the type of volume is important too. And I think he is going to be heavily used in the passing game when we think of a lot of the dump offs that we could expect to see, even off play action, like we've seen in the preseason. So Najee Harris is just getting that bell cow usage through the preseason, through camps. It's what we're hearing. And we know this regime has, drafted this guy to basically be Le'Veon Bell 2.0. So I think Najee hits the ground running right away in year one. And I am not too worried about, him trying to hurdle dudes like we were talking about before the show, Craig.
Yeah, that's one thing I talk about is just hopefully he doesn't try to do that too often, get hurt coming down awkwardly or something. You never know what's going to happen. When you talk about like the passing game work, how many targets are you thinking that's possible for him? I think the Steelers had, about 78, 79 last year to the running back position in total.
Yeah, and I think that goes way up this year. Like, I think we have been missing that piece, arguably. We've definitely tried to maybe arguably force it with James Conner a little bit when he's been healthy. I guess I would say, like Joe Mixon and him are such an interesting debate because I see most of the sides of the coins landing on Najee Harris's side, even if we go into the offensive line and the type of offense those teams are running and how much market share distribution is going to go to which position and stuff. I just like Najee more than Joe Mixon. And a lot of people are using that Joe Mixon did actually have a career high. I think he had just over 4 targets per game last year when healthy before going down. And I think that's almost Najee Harris's floor, especially when I do kind of believe in that Najee Harris Le'Veon Bell comp. especially thinking of Tomlin and some of the tendencies we've seen from that coaching staff in the past, and just some of the built-in efficiency I think that we could see in Pittsburgh, just the massive emphasis they've placed on correcting this run game, because it shouldn't be lost on folks just how bad the Steelers run game has been, like horribly bad over the last 3 seasons, under 1,500 yards rushing as a team in back-to-back-to-back seasons, and no other team in the NFL has even gone 2 straight seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I really think it's wheels up for Najee. Like, he has all the volume, and the team has all the incentive to really try and deliver on one of those huge seasons for Najee right out of the gate.
I think at this point, I'm kind of cautiously optimistic. I think I still have him behind Eckler and Mixon and Gibson there, just ahead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I do think there's a ton of opportunity for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but that's kind of a whole nother topic for a different day, where if everything falls just the right way for him, he could have a very strong year too. These other running backs that they do have in Pittsburgh, do you have like any interest in them for Dynasty?
Anthony Mcfarlane, I think, would be the only guy that I might have in a taxi squad. And, I wasn't a huge fan of him coming out. I know he has that explosive element that we kind of lacked. I think we added that bell cow now, but they do have him returning kicks. He does have some familiarity with this offense. So I don't think Anthony Mcfarlane is dead in the water. Benny Snell, I mean, he feels like the handcuff to Nadia Harris. That's why I don't think Anthony McFarlane's like a huge asset to go out and try and acquire even in your dynasty leagues, because it wouldn't be, anything close to him being a handcuff. I think he's capped at like 8 to 12 touches in a defined role at any given time. But I think he's a dangerous player on early downs. Like, he could spell on first and second downs, I think. And I think he could come in motion and maybe return some kicks. So always a player to keep your mind on or keep your eye on. But Benny Snell, Kalen Ballage, kind of the guys that are also there that I'm less interested in. We just kind of know their upside is limited, especially in the passing game. But I feel like Benny Snell might be the sneaky handcuff to Najee Harris, unfortunately, still.
Yeah, I know McFarlane was a guy that I was buying, especially like early preseason, just because, like if nothing happened, they didn't really add a major piece. It was just one of those guys I was trying to pick up, because you could get him for dirt cheap at the, going into the preseason. You can get him for like a 4th round rookie pick. Is this finally the year they cut Jalen Samuels?
Yeah, that's a longer story for sure. I think he brings some versatility, obviously, and I've always had a grudge against him just from that tight end eligibility in fantasy a couple of years ago, winning people titles at the tight end position as a bell cow running back. I'll just never get over that. But yeah, I don't know what they do with Jalen Samuels. I definitely don't think they're sold on his talent as much as they were, coming out of North Carolina State. But that offense might have been a little better than we thought at North Carolina State. Let's put it that way, because Kelvin Harmon, I think, just got cut today too.
I think Jacoby Myers was on that team still too, but
best player. Who knew it?
Yeah, well, he got Ryan Finley drafted, and Jacoby Myers didn't get drafted somehow. But that's a whole other story for a different. Samuel's best thing he does anymore is block, and hopefully he just kind of gets replaced and ran out of that role. Then we move over to the wide receivers. So Deontay Johnson's the first one coming off the board. ECR wide receiver 21, ADP wide receiver 22. Going around guys like Tyler Lockett, DJ Moore, Michael Thomas, that's still probably falling, so that's probably not the best accurate one right now, and then Kenny Galladay as well. I'll just go through all 3 wide receivers once. So then we got Chase Claypool, ECR wide receiver 28, ADP wide receiver 28. Going around guys like T. Higgins, Odell Beckham Jr., Brandon Ayuk, and then Juju Smith-Schuster, wide receiver 30 in both ECR and ADP. Going around guys like Devonta Smith, DJ Chark, Cortland Sutton, and Robbie Anderson. So maybe your kind of quick overview on the wide receivers, that just kind of your thoughts on them overall, and then kind of compared to the guys that they're going against there.
Yeah, and this is where objectivity comes into play, in my opinion, because I love all 3 Steelers wide receivers in a vacuum. Maybe not Juju as much as most people. I think he's definitely constricted to a slot role for the most part, a big slot role, but definitely offers some value after the catch. But, that's what slot wide receivers should do. But I think this wide receiver room needs to be taken in the context that all 3 of these guys are going in that range where we're targeting wide receivers heavily in our fantasy drafts. And there are a lot of juicy names that you described going around these players. So I think Deontay Johnson is a tad overvalued. I think Chase Claypool would be the wide receiver I'm identifying as the one I'm targeting. I know he suffered an ankle injury in practice today. It is Tuesday, I believe, the 17th. But I don't believe it's a serious injury. Everyone's saying it's a minor ankle sprain. So I think he'll be good to go for week 1. I think he just offers the most upside. I think he's going to dominate this team in air yards and deep targets. And he led this team in 10 zone targets as a rookie last year. So I think he definitely offers touchdown upside. And I think touchdown upside might be the key to this conversation with the wide receivers in Pittsburgh, because, I talk a lot about touchdown regression that is, really due for this Pittsburgh team. And it's really going to hit the wide receivers like Deontay Johnson, like Juju Smith-Schuster the most. And that's on top of the volume coming down significantly. Like we talked about Nadia Harris, the emphasis being placed on the running backs. The Pittsburgh Steelers scored the fewest fantasy points at the running back position last year, which is just kind of shocking to hear out loud if you're a Steelers fan. And the wide receivers scored the second most fantasy points at the wide receiver position in PPR leagues in 2020. So, we can't have one or the other. I think, we might only be able to get one or the other. I don't think we can have both with a Ben Roethlisberger offense with Matt Canada coming in. So I think the wide receivers are really going to struggle when it comes to volume, touchdowns, and all three of them paying off. And that's kind of why I want Chase Claypool, because he's kind of the perfect flex guy who can score a touchdown. He can have a deep ball. He can do both. And I can't get over the concerns I have about the volume declining, because the Steelers, have pretty much led the NFL in passing when it comes to the last 2 seasons under Ben Roethlisberger. And all the tea leaves are pointing away from that volume. Like, the wide receivers in Pittsburgh combined for almost 300 catches last year, over 3,000 yards receiving, and 30 touchdowns. That was first in the NFL. So I just don't see those numbers continuing, especially because we're anticipating a big uptick from the running back position.
So like with Chase Claypool, obviously he had double-digit touchdowns as a rookie. Do you see that happening again? Do you see it coming down a little bit? You don't see many rookies with double-digit touchdowns from the wide receiver position in general.
Yeah, I think I think he is the one who is definitely not in line to experience a massive regression. Like, I just think Juju and Deontay Johnson have really been gifted a lot of touchdowns. Their touchdown rates are just much higher than the average when it comes to NFL wide receivers. So, I think they're the ones who could experience the regression, whereas Chase Claypool actually led this team in end zone targets last year. So I think he's the one who can really, in end zone targets per game, in 10 zone market share. So I think he's the one who could really experience that spike touchdown season. And he probably is that wide receiver that they're looking to, or Ben is looking to in close, because he's such a big body contested catch machine. And that back shoulder from him on an out route is basically undefendable. And he's also the guy who I think is going to be going down for the go routes if that play action is on fire in this offense, which we're all kind of crossing our fingers when it comes to Ben Roethlisberger. But, we saw it in the preseason when he got the wind knocked out of him there, that Chase Claypool is going to be the guy hitting those 40-plus yard catches as well. I know that one was from Mason Rudolph, but, Ben can throw better than at least Mason Rudolph.
Yep, at least that's the hope.
Can't throw much worse. But I don't think it should be lost on us. Like, I know these guys are all, like, they all scored as top 24 wide receivers in PPR last year, and they're all being drafted as top 30 wide receivers this year. But none of those three guys in the most voluminous passing game in all of football last year hit 1,000 yards receiving. None had 1,500 air yards, and nobody had 450 yards after the catch. These guys combined for 4 games of 100-plus yards receiving last year from the big three combined. That is pretty crazy. Like, 11 players in the NFL had more by themselves, including guys like Cole Beasley, Corey Davis.
It's crazy, like, when you think about it that way, too. Juju's, like, the interesting guy because, like, especially, like, if you're playing in a home league, there's going to be, like, people are there. He's going to go way late in some leagues, but he's going to go way early in some leagues because it's just, like, he's that name, so you're either like, well, I know his name, so I'm going to pick him, or Juju's, or like you look back the last couple of years and you're just like, well, I don't want anything to do with him because, he got hurt 2 years ago. Then last year he was kind of, just there more or less.
Yeah. Oh, and it was it's hard to not call his season one of the most boring. It's just amazing what touchdowns can do. Like, he had 6.5 yards per target, 8.6 yards per reception. Like, we used to laugh at Jarvis Landry and people like that is pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's like the worst version of Keenan Allen.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good comp, I think. Like, that's kind of his always been his his high end range of outcomes when it comes to his career arc, I think. But yeah, he had the fewest receiving yards in NFL history by a wide receiver who had 90 catches. That's over 202 samples in NFL history. Juju was the absolute woat.
But and like when you think about it too, there's similar guys that you can draft like him later too. So I know a lot of people don't like Cole Beasley right now, but pretty similar player.
Yeah, so I was just going to say the ceiling is totally gone. Like in 2020, last year, he finished as a top 12 wide receiver just 3 times. Like that's not very good. And then the last 2 years now, he has 4 top 12 finishes combined. And that's compared to 5 in 2018. And he had 4 wide receiver finishes, 5 wide receiver 1 finishes in his rookie season. And we've just seen things like his yards after the catch per reception come down in all 4 seasons now, like in all 3 seasons after the next. It's been pretty depressing stuff when it comes to Juju, and you can blame it on the offense all you want, but we just don't see this offense transforming anytime soon.
No, and it'd be real interesting. Like Dynasty, this is kind of often Dynasty range, though. Just see like where he actually ends up after this season too, whether he comes back or he ends up somewhere. I don't even know where he's better at this point now, unless you're just tied to like a elite quarterback with like
or a scheme, right? Like tied to a scheme is what I'm thinking, like a Rams offense, someone who can generate yards after the catch. The Chiefs would have been a perfect fit for him, I think. But and I think Juju has a lot to prove in his own right? Like he's averaging about 60% as much yards after the catch per game in the last 2 years than he did in his first 2 seasons. And that was obviously when he had Antonio Brown across from him in both those seasons. So it's he has a lot to prove, I think, to even get a decent contract, even as the cap corrects in 2022.
Yep. But he's definitely betting on himself. We'll see what happens with that. Obviously, the last guy just kind of on the list is the wide receiver 4, James Washington. Obviously, he requested a trade already. Do you see anything with him like dynasty-wise? Obviously, he's on the last year of his contract anyways. So is there anywhere he can really end up that he could be somewhat relevant? Essentially, you could probably get him for free in Dynasty right now because he's essentially nothing.
No, I don't think he's a bad guy to go out and try and acquire, because you're right. You can probably get him for like a 3rd round rookie pick right now. But I've never been a huge James Washington guy, just a little bulky of a guy. And I just feel like the league's kind of trending away from his archetype, but maybe that's me. I just don't see a need for a lot of teams to have that, 3rd outside wide receiver on their depth chart. You know what I mean? So I'm just not a huge James Washington fan. I think the fact that he requested a trade is interesting because he's actually shown pretty well, but he does, benefit from a lot of advantages in that offense historically when he has gotten on the field. So, and volume for that matter, and rapport with Mason Rudolph when it comes to that facet. So I think he probably ends up disappointing if somebody's hoping they can get some retrade value. I'm not sure how much retrade value he'll carry even in the future, especially as we just see such a plethora of wide receivers coming out every year as the college game kind of transforms a little bit.
Yeah, I can't remember who I was talking to the other day. I was talking about that too. Especially guys like this, where they didn't really do much to rookie contract and then they go somewhere else. There's not a lot of those guys that hit when they go to a different team anymore, especially with all these young wide receivers that they're so talented and they have such niche talents coming into the league too now. That I talked about a little bit with quarterback too. It's just squeeze, and especially with like quarterback, it's even more noticeable as some of these guys that are older are playing is squeezing out the middle guys more. So we're kind of seeing a little bit with that with the wide receiver position now too, it seems like.
No, absolutely.
Is there any other potential flyers or stashes for dynasties lower down on the depth chart for wide receiver that you like at all?
No, there really isn't. I mean, it was one of those years where we just didn't get that guy that we're gonna keep our finger on when it comes to the Steelers draft. Usually they do take somebody. I mean, we'll definitely keep our eyes out on somebody, and especially if James Washington starts to fall out of favor or whatever. But right now, really not much room. And I think that does give us a little bit of optimism to see all 3 of those big wide receivers top 30 in ADP at the position. I wonder about the tight end market share too. I don't think it's ever been above 20% in the entire Mike Tomlin era. So it'll be interesting to see with Eric Ebron and Pat Freiermuth there as well. I think Tanner, what's his face? The guy they drafted in the 5th round. I don't think Tomlin ever spent more than like Kevin Colbert. I mean, excuse me. I don't think he's ever spent more than a 5th round pick on a tight end. So I know they like Freiermuth, and the concern is that maybe he's in there actually blocking more than he is running routes, and maybe Eric Ebron actually is a serviceable tight end in a streaming capacity for fantasy. I do wonder about that, but from a dynasty perspective, I definitely have my eyes on Pat Freiermuth in the passing game down on the depth chart.
That's kind of moving over to tight end anyways, but Ebron comes in at ECR tight end 25. ADP, he actually dropped down to 32 now. He was closer to 27 the other day, so he's pretty much on waivers. Freiermuth at tight end 41 in ECR. ADP is like tight end 36, so they're both pretty much on waivers at this point in time. I don't know what to do with either of them. It's kind of like wait and see either way. In Dynasty, obviously, Freiermuth, he's pretty cheap, honestly, for what you could get him in rookie drafts. If you guys are still doing rookie drafts out there too, because if Kyle Pitts wasn't in this draft, we'd be talking a lot more about Freiermuth.
I totally agree. And he reminds me like the only thing that scares me going forward is with this Matt Canada offense, how much is he going to be blocking? Because, we've all been big Adam Troutman fans this offseason. Then lo and behold, Juwan Johnson's like playing the Jared Cook run participation role, and Troutman's in there blocking. So it is scary when you think about how this Steelers team might be more of a run heavy unit on the horizon. So that's the only thing that gives me pause for thought. Is that he might end up being overvalued when you think of 2022 startups, but that also means that you can get some retrade value. But I think you might actually have to wait a couple of years till they get a quarterback or something. When you think of Deontay Johnson and Claypool also being locked in, and Nadia Harris, who I think will definitely factor in heavily to the passing game, and I think there's a strong relationship between running back and tight end targets for sure.
We have a little bit of questions, whether or not his shoulder is going to hold up and stay healthy too long term, because we kind of seen a couple different things with it now. I'm not like super concerned about it, but it is something that's out there too. I do like some of the receiver guys they brought in, undrafted free agents. I was a big Rico Bussey guy at North Texas. He was Jalen Darden before Jalen Darden. People don't realize that. He tore his ACL. Then all of a sudden, Jalen Darden popped up on the map. And then after he tore his ACL, he grad transferred to Hawaii. They kind of had that weird season where they weren't going to play. Then they kind of were going to play. So can't really hold that against the guy. He ran a 4.43 at San Jose State's pro day. For a guy that you don't think's that big, he's actually 6'2", 190 pounds. So he's bigger than you actually think.
The one guy we didn't mention is what's the name? Ray. Good old Ray. He's in there with the ones, I'm telling you. So he is the wide receiver 4, I think, in this offense right now, even maybe ahead of James Washington, just because of the utility that he brings to this. I keep saying it, but the Matt Canada offense is going to look a little different. It's going to be a unique, relatively boring offense in Pittsburgh, but a lot of disguised looks, a lot of motion pre-snap, and a lot of play action, hopefully. And Ray McLeod really suits a lot of that, especially with Chase Claypool on one side and him on the other.
Yeah, he's kind of like their Isaiah McKenzie at this point, how the Bills use him. But yeah, that's pretty good overview. Obviously, I'm going to talk about the offensive line a little bit. That's kind of the big one that everybody's kind of like, it's not very good. They lost 4 starters, but, I'm just got my notes here too. So you lost Marquise Pouncey at center, Andre Villanueva at left tackle, Matt Filer at guard, DeCastro. They ended up cutting at guard and bringing in Trey Turner too. But you look at the PFF grades for like these guys. Pouncey was a 54.8 overall last year. Villanueva was fine at 74.6. He was the best. Filer is 65 and DeCastro is 64 essentially. So you're not looking at like, I think this is kind of the point you kind of been trying to drive home on Twitter and in the, just different pods in the offseason too. These guys don't have to be that great to be as good or as bad, if you want to call it that way, as the guys that were last year. It's a very interesting offensive line because I think to an extent we kind of know that Trey Turner is going to start. Can't pronounce the one dude's name. He played right tackle last year, Okafor. It looks like Okafor, but there's a couple extra letters in there. He's going to play left tackle.
Well, they're giving him some tough love in camp, but I think he's pretty locked into that position, in my opinion. I mean, even just one of those draft capital things where you may as well give Okafor a run. Yeah, Chakuma.
It's a little bit interesting too, because like if you look at his metric or like his PFF stuff from last year, right tackle, you might have a little bit concern about him playing left tackle this year because he wasn't the best at right tackle. Now he's moving across the line. the first game and the Hall of Fame game, obviously they didn't start a lot of the starters. Kendrick Green was in at center. Obviously the rookie out of Illinois, 3rd round pick. He's kind of struggled so far.
Yeah, it's tough to see. And, they definitely like him though. He brings a lot of like the old school kind of Steelers qualities, I think, from that offensive line, and durability, I think, was a big thing that stood out from his profile. But, one of those guys that I definitely felt like I was talking myself into a little bit and felt like he was a Steelers pick or whatever. So that's one of those fine lines with objectivity, right? And I think the big point with this offense, though, is that they will still get the ball out quickly. So we're hoping Matt Canada's offense builds in a little efficiency for this run game, because they have been really bad in the run blocking department, but they've also been really good in the pass blocking department, or allowing really a few amount of sacks, but that's because of them getting rid of the ball under 2.5 seconds about 3/4 of the time. Yeah. I think the interior is a little bit stronger than people give it credit for. If Finney stays healthy, the run blocking is a little bit better than it was last year, and I think it will be a little bit of addition by subtraction, and hopefully these guys can build a little bit of continuity through camp, because I would have liked to seen a little bit more of this starting unit in one of these first 2 games for sure.
The thing they have more this year is they have depth. They have guys, that are probably on the second team that have starting experience at the NFL level. Obviously, BJ Finney came back. He's got 13 career starts. They got Chaz Green, who's just kind of a swing depth tackle at this point, but he's got 8 career starts in the league. Joe Haig, who's actually started both games at right tackle for them so far, he's got 38 career starts. And then Rashad Coward, he hasn't played good at the NFL level, but he's got 15 career starts for what it is, and he's actually started both games, which is kind of interesting because Dodson came in with the second unit, and a lot of people are assuming he starts too. So
that's, I think, the battle to watch, which is really interesting for sure. I think BJ Finney and Zach Banner, like some of these guys aren't, they're serviceable, and I think that's a big difference when you look at some of the Bengals, who I think are going to have a really hard time with players I think are just playing bad on their offensive line. So I think offensive line is in dire need across the NFL, and I think we did, have a really strong draft class in that respect, but we know that there's an incubation period with a lot of offensive linemen. So I think having some of these Jags, if you will, or at least some serviceable offensive linemen, is going to go a long way in Pittsburgh, or at least to compensate for whatever people might think they're losing with some of the senior members retiring and moving on in Pittsburgh.
Well, the thing at the end of the day is if these guys can come in and just play average and be like a bottom 10 offensive line instead of like a bottom 5 offensive line, that makes a big difference in the long run. Healthy. It doesn't sound like it, but it actually does. Yeah, but definitely a lot of position battles there. And I think they're really just like trying to camp these preseason games. And especially since they got the Hall of Fame game too, that they're really trying to shuffle these guys in and out and figure out which piece works with which piece, honestly.
Yeah, and they're giving some tough love too, so we definitely have to pay attention to these. Like it's hard to distinguish sometimes between tough love from Tomlin and him trying to win a press conference. So we have to monitor some of these battles, especially on that interior offensive line, all the way through these preseason games, I think.
Yeah, and Banner is actually the interesting one because he's the one that's actually graded out better as a pass or as a run blocker than a pass blocker, pretty much more than everybody else on the offensive line. So.
And he is like a run blocking specialist, and that's what you're saying. It is worrisome with Zach Banner and Okorafor on the outside there, because Chikuma definitely left a lot to be desired and hasn't necessarily lived up to that draft capital, and those are pretty tough anchors to have on each tackle position, and might have factored into taking Pat Freiermuth in round 2.
Yeah, but I think definitely that Joe Haig addition, like. He's not anything special, but at least having him there, if one of them struggles, they can at least plug him in and he'll hopefully be an okay swing tackle just to plug in either way. So
ahead of Chaz Green for sure.
Yeah. Chaz Green, it's kind of like between him and Coward probably making the team because most teams only keep 9 offensive linemen. I assume they're keeping Dan Moore Jr. since they spent like a 4th round pick on him, which I wasn't a big fan of at the time. He's one of the worst offense. Well, he is just one of the worst.
Another durability thing too, I think. Like he played every game since he was a sophomore. Like he was another guy that they liked. It's kind of weird, eh? And then he played in the SEC. Like he has some pedigree, you know what I mean? So I don't know. It definitely seemed like a weird pick, but they took. I think they took his teammate as well. it was like Buddy Johnson or something.
Oh, that was a little bit of a reach too.
Yeah, so like they just were reaching on the Texas A&M boys in the 2021 draft.
Yeah, because I thought Moore was closer, like 7th-round pick. The similarities between the Texans draft the year before when they took Charlie Heck in the 4th round and Dan Moore, they were both, bottom of the barrel at the Senior Bowl, and they both got taken about 3 rounds too early. So I think Dan Moore is at least better than Charlie Heck, because Charlie Heck is not good. We'll just put it that way. But his dad was good.
But to sum it up, like, I really think this offensive line doesn't have to be too good. Like, if we look at it, Big Ben completed 319 passes on PFF.com in 2020 when he released the ball in under 2.5 seconds. The next highest was Tom Brady with 241. So it's just insane. He did it almost 75% of the time. And when he did, his completion percentage was over 70%. When he didn't, Big Ben completed under 53% of his passes, and 6 of his 10 interceptions came on just those 152 attempts, where he had to hold on to the ball longer than 2.5 seconds. So if, they might even have more incentive to get rid of the ball quicker in 2022 or 21 with the Matt Canada system.
Do you think they're going to use like some of that play action you talked about and kind of max protect on some of that and try to take the deep shots a couple more times this year too?
We've definitely seen it in the preseason, so I would say yes. Does Big Ben respond to it? Because we really haven't seen it. I'll tweet out the numbers, but it is mind-blowing how little Big Ben has used play action over the last couple of years, over the last 3 years. But it's also to be, thought of in the context that play action has absolutely exploded around the league, as outside zone has been, really adopted by almost half the league, and play action is a big byproduct of that. You think of the Minnesota Vikings, the 49ers, the Browns, like the Packers, all these teams are just blowing teams out of the water. The Titans, it's all play action. It is a pandemic and no one's talking about it. I don't understand, but the Steelers are ready to jump on board, and it's kind of, Big Ben has very little excuses left in his arsenal. So I think he definitely still has a lot of regression that is going to hit him, and the volume's going to come down, but I think there's room for his efficiency to still be there. And hopefully those deep shots are just much more efficient, even if the volume in that department comes down.
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's a lot of opportunity to improve for him in that regard. There's a lot of room to improve kind of as an overall offense too, even though we're going to see it be more like it was last year to an extent. But some of this motion just open up space on the field overall, get some more opportunities to do things, I think. But that's pretty much all we got here. Went a little bit longer than probably thought originally, but once again, Ty, thank you for joining me today. Anything you want to plug right now, be sure to let the people know.
No, just we have a big guest again. We've had some really huge guests on the TNFF pod. Make sure you're subscribed on the TNFF network on YouTube, TrueNorthFFB.com, and that's where you can find the podcast. We are part of the FantasyPoints.com media group, so you can find us on FantasyPoints.com as well. 21 True North 10, all caps, gets you a promo code at FantasyPoints.com. Sorry about some of the background noise, Craig. This is my first recording in this location. I wanted to make sure we got on the mics, though, and I love talking Steelers, so my apologies. Hope part of it. So I just appreciate all the hard work you've done as well. So anytime you need me to hop on the mics, I am at your disposal, my good friend.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it. If you guys are out there watching, definitely be sure to check out the True North pod with Ty and Trav. Definitely be sure to check out all the other pods on the True North Fantasy Network as well on YouTube. The website, I know the new one's coming out relatively soon. I know Trav's been working like crazy, but it's going to be pretty good. There, obviously, I think I talked about this in a couple different videos too, but the how-to series is going to be on there. There's going to be a lot of great content coming out relatively shortly as well. So definitely be sure to check out that. If you guys are new to the channel and you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so. It really, I really would appreciate it. It really helps build the community that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports. And that's truly one for you, the viewers, helping you with your fantasy football, helping you with your DFS, whether it's NBA or NFL. And then, just covering some of the basic NFL news, talking some 2022 NFL draft prospects as we get moving along in the season, get closer to the draft time. And that's pretty much it. But if there's anything else you guys like to see in the future, if there's any other guests you'd like to see. If you'd like to see Ty come back or any of the other guests had on in the past, definitely be sure to let me know down in the comments. As this 2021 season team by team preview goes along, I'll be having some more guests coming on as well. Got a couple more planned at this point in time, but that's pretty much all we have for today's video. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed. And with that being said, have a great rest of your day.